Okay, in this section, I'm going to help you write a series of explanations about factors that can influence the discharge of a river. Now, you should have watched the first tutorial in this series, which will have helped you set up an aim and explain Bradshaw's model in as much detail as you could, and you may have also evaluated Bradshaw's model and told me why we should trust it. And so if we just have a quick little review about that, this is Bradshaw's model, and we are expecting the discharge, which is what we're about to talk about, to increase dramatically as we go downstream. Okay, so with that in mind, let's have a look at the main thing you can use. If you go to the introduction of your student guide, make sure that is open. You find that in step 1 in the Google Classroom. And also make sure that the document that you are writing this in is open as well, and that everything you write is placed beneath what you will have written here in the introduction. So you already have your aim and your explanation of Bradshaw's model in this section. And what I'd like you to do is add today this bit of work for this tutorial underneath that. Okay, so let's just have a little look about what you can use to help you. If you read number 3, you're being asked to explain using lots of geographic terms. They are quite important, and I'll show you some of them in a second in your explanations. What factors could influence the changes in the characteristics that we are looking at in Bradshaw's model? And obviously the main factor that we're going to be looking at, the key one we're exploring, will be discharge. You yourself will also be choosing one of these other 3 to explore, and that will be a choice that you have to make yourself. But that's for another tutorial. Let's just stick with discharge. What factors could influence discharge? And it's quite important you explain. You don't just describe, you give reasons. And I've got to go back to this idea of key terms. You want to use as many of the key geographic terms as you can in your descriptions. And that's how you're picking up marks. Okay, so let's just have a little think first of all. What's the first mark? What's the first thing you're going to want to explain? Why does the discharge increase? Now, before you write anything, let's just talk about the drainage basin of a river. Okay, so the drainage basin of a river is the entire area of land on which water or precipitation lands and drains across that area, normally draining into a river. So it's the area of land which is drained by the river. Okay, and what Bradshaw is saying that up here near what we call the source, the discharge will be small, and as we move down the river to the mouth down here, the discharge of the river should increase. So the very first thing we have to say and tell the reader is what actually is discharge. We're about to say it's going to increase. We need to actually say what discharge is. Okay, so I would start by saying that discharge is the volume of water passing a given location on the river every second. And it is calculated, or it is not calculated, it is measured in a unit called cumecs. That is spelled C-U-M-E-C-S, and they're all in capitals. So a bit like centimeters measures distance, cumecs measures discharge. Okay, so we measure discharge in cumecs, and that's really gives it tells us about the volume of water passing every second. Cumecs actually stands for cubic meters per second. So just a sentence telling us what discharge is. Then you'd probably say, you know, or remind me that Bradshaw hypothesized that it will increase, and the reason, some of the reasons for its increase, you're now going to explain. So you would want to have a little kind of a connective sentence there so it makes sense for the reader what you're going to be doing. And the first reason that it increases is that as you move further down a river, the area of land being drained by that river increases. So if we look up here at the source, for example, the area of land being drained into that location is the land above it, which is just this tiny area above it here. By the time we're down here, the area of land that is draining into that point is much larger. Okay, and therefore the catchment area that can catch water and drain into the river has increased, and therefore we would expect the amount of water in the river to have increased. Okay, as second thing you can start to explain is as you move further down a river, more tributaries join the river, And you could say a tributary is a smaller stream joining a larger one, like this river here. And of course, every time a tributary joins another river, when two of them join at a point we call a confluence, then we would expect the discharge or the amount of water in the river to have increased. And if once we're down here, we've then got not just this river, but we've now got two. And down here, we've got a third. So continually more rivers are discharging their water into the main river channel, and therefore the discharge should increase. Okay, so all of that's going to get you at least 1, maybe 2 marks, depending on how well you explain it. What you can then do is say, also another factor influencing the river is not just the amount of tributaries that are discharging into the river, but actually water is traveling through soil because it is infiltrating into soil and then traveling as a through flow. You can see that here through the soil towards the river. Or it is percolating, we can see that in this part here, into the rock underneath the soil, and then it's traveling as a groundwater flow towards the river. Now, because of these through flows and groundwater flows feeding the river, as you move further down the river, there are more through flows and ground flows feeding that river, and therefore we would expect the discharge to increase. Okay, so I would pause it now, think that through, maybe replay this again and write it in a nice succinct paragraph using the keywords like infiltrate, percolate, the drainage basin, tributary rivers, confluence points. Bring in as many of the keywords as you can in a way that when you read it, you can understand what you've read and it makes sense. Okay. So I'm just going to stick with this diagram because there is a second factor that can influence the discharge of a river, and it's sort of indicated by this this diagram, and it's the rainfall. So the amount of rain coming out of the sky is clearly going to have a major influence on the discharge of the entire river. So if it rains heavily, then you're going to get a massive increase in the discharge of the river because there's going to be more water flowing across the land, and therefore there'll be more water flowing into the river. Okay, and that's an obvious thing. However, if it rains just in one area of a drainage basin, so say it was raining just here, then there would be a sudden increase in the river downstream. But because water can't travel uphill because of gravity, we wouldn't expect much discharge up here. Anything that falls towards the back of the river will flow through towards the end of the river. However, if it doesn't, if it flows just in one area of a drainage basin, then that part of the river will increase in discharge dramatically, but elsewhere in the drainage basin, you might not see the same increase. So that would be another factor influencing the discharge of a river. Okay, so let's go to a couple of other key things. One of them that's kind of indicated also in this diagram, which is to do with vegetation. Okay, so how much vegetation surrounds your river has a big influence on its discharge. If your river is flowing through a landscape that's heavily vegetated, like we can see in this photograph, then there's going to be high levels of this process known as interception. And what interception is where the tree leaves capture the water on its way to earth. They then funnel that water onto the base of the tree, and the tree absorbs the water through its root system. What that means is that quite a lot of the water that comes out of the sky never actually gets to the river. So if you have a heavy vegetated landscape, you are going to not expect your discharge of your river to increase too much. As a matter of fact, because water is being absorbed by the vegetation, it's possible that the discharge is going to remain quite low. Okay, the reverse of that would happen in a very deforested landscape. You would expect the discharge to increase dramatically. Okay, so if you want to explain that, you can do and bring that in as a key factor, and bring in all the ideas of interception and roots absorbing the water and therefore affecting the discharge. Okay. Another factor that can influence the discharge of a river is this idea of urbanization. Okay. Now, this is an academic article that talks about how cities influence water. And in your main project, you are going to be exploring this issue because the river we are studying does flow through a city. Now, what has urbanization got to do with rivers? Well, there's a couple of things. When we build cities around rivers, we're building large areas of tarmacked surface and buildings. Now, these types of materials stop water infiltrating into the soil. So water can't go through tarmac. And because of that, all of the water that lands on a city, tends to get channeled through gutters and pipes and drains directly into rivers. And what that means is when a river flows through a city, we would expect its discharge to increase probably quite dramatically because there is no natural storage happening within the city. There's very little vegetation. The water can't absorb into soil because it's all been tarmacked over, and therefore all of that water is being directed to the river. So that's the first factor, how urbanization influences the discharge of river. It would increase a lot. Second factor is you can see that in all four diagrams, these rivers are very straightened. And the influence that straightened rivers have is that they funnel water very quickly through the city. Now, the reason for straightening rivers is because it makes them very efficient. They carve a deep channel and they don't have to go around bends. And because they no longer go around bends and carving a deeper channel as a consequence, water can move through the city very efficiently and quickly. Now, sometimes cities do that because it allows boats to navigate up and down the river. And that's one reason for straightening rivers. Another reason is because you want water to flow through the city as quickly as you can, because it reduces flooding. But the influence basically of river straightening is to increase or accelerate the discharge of water at that particular point. Okay, right, so we've gone through a number of factors to do with the drainage basin and explaining how that influences discharge. We've talked about how vegetation influences discharge and how urbanization can influence discharge. What you could finally do now, if you so choose, is you could look at some other factors. Now, we did study this in the biosphere topic, and I found this little slideshow, which I'm just going to skip through quickly, because it talks about the main factors. Let me just get to the actual spot, and you can see that there are physical factors that influence the discharge of a river, and you can see them listed here, and there are urban factors like we can see here. So what you might want to do is read through these or actually go into your main class notes and write them up. Or what you might, not all of them, but just maybe one of them or two of them. These are all things that can influence the discharge of river. Or you might choose to do some Google research. Maybe type something like what factors can influence the discharge of river. And you'll see lots of websites that give you ideas, what factors affect it. And just pick one of them. Write out the explanation that you're given and give it a good bit of detail. Use keywords. You want a paragraph here. You want to be earning each mark by explaining. What you could also do if you want to is write a couple of sentences that tell me why the website that you've used, whatever one you use, should be trusted. What makes this a good website? And if you do that well enough, you actually can also earn another evaluative mark for commenting on the quality of the source you used. You don't have to, and actually all of the explanations I've given you so far and the ones you'll be doing for the other things will allow you to earn full marks.